Part 139. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1383. Qi Shaosheng withdrew his hand with an ugly face, and said in a low voice, "Is there any king in the world? If he really hates us, it doesn't matter where we hide. Mother, I think we should find a way to get rid of him. Anger is right." Knowing the son is Moruomua, Wu stared at his face for a while, then slowly sat up straight and said, "He really made me taste the greatest pain in the world. The hatred of killing his mother is not shared, and it can make him calm down. Unless she dies, what is the difference between her son saying this and letting her die?" Qi Shaosheng's face was so hot that he got up with a huh and said, "Mother, I have stayed with my third brother long enough, and I will come to see you next time." Qi Shaosheng pulled out his dazed younger brother. Going back to his hometown is indeed a solution, but will he still be Lord Ho after he goes back? Although he is just a powerless marquis now, it is equivalent to entering the noble class of Daki, and if he returns to the countryside, then he is nothing. Qi Shaosheng is reluctant to part with this wealth, even though this wealth requires him to continue with trepidation. Wu Shi couldn't see what was going on in her son's heart, so she was even more sad. His son came into the palace without asking how she was doing, let alone picking her up, which showed his indifference. Wu cried and fell to the ground, crying and laughing, "Zhu Wan, hello, hello, the son born without education is better than the one I hold in my hand. Are you satisfied now? Are you satisfied? But what is wrong with me? My cousin and I have already agreed on our marriage. I was supposed to be his first wife. It was you who intervened, otherwise you and Qi Feng would have died long ago," a hoarse voice remembered. Wu Shi shuddered, looked up in astonishment, and Qi Ziyuan walked in with tears in his eyes. Qi Ziyuan drank a lot of wine, he looked down at Wu Shi who was lying on the ground, a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and said, "If Qi Feng hadn't lied to my mother and married the Zhu family, would you have survived to Linen?" He squatted in front of Mrs. Wu and asked expressionlessly, "Back then he lied to my mother and you just watched, why didn't you stop? You just need to tell my mother that your two families are talking about getting married. Will she pester Qi Feng if she is proud?" Wu Shi couldn't help shaking. At this moment she could no longer treat Qi Ziyuan as the child she was back then, she was afraid of him. Qi Ziyuan had already got up, smiled at her and said, "I just came to see if you are doing well, and I feel relieved when I see that you are not doing well. Such days are still going to last, take your time to experience it, it's okay time to think about my mother and father." Wu looked at Qi Ziyuan walking away with a pale face, and couldn't help regretting that she should have died with Qi Feng, or before him, at least at that time. Even if she had a bad relationship with Qi Ziyuan, she was still Qi Ziyuan. The hostess of the house is Qi Feng's wife? Eunuch Wan supported the emperor, and said in a low voice, "Slow down, it's cold, please add a cloak, the ministers are still waiting. Let people keep an eye on her, don't let her die so easily." Qi Ziyuan pulled up his cloak, and said with a smile, "It's almost the end of the evening, so let's go home and watch the year by ourselves." Eunuch Wan responded respectfully, and was about to ask someone to bring Long Tuo over when Qi Ziyuan waved his hand and said, "I just had a drink and my body is warm, let's go for a while." Qi Ziyuan took the lead. Eunuch Wan knew that he drank a lot today, so he hurriedly stepped forward to carefully support him, for fear of falling him. Qi Ziyuan laughed loudly and said, "This little wine won't trouble me, so you don't need to help me." Qi Ziyuan is frugal, and there are few concubines in the harem, so he sealed up many unused palaces and only let people clean them regularly. Of course, the street lights are not fully lit. Today is the New Year's Eve, so I have to waste oil to light all the street lights on this road. The lights are yellow and orange, and you can only vaguely see the ground, but the palace at night also has a special charm. Qi Ziyuan only felt relieved in his heart, "I have no regrets in this life." I have fought a whole country, had a son, and avenged my mother, and my younger brother has grown up. If I can do 2 or 3 practical things for the common people in this world, you are worthy of this experience in your life. Eunuch 1 hurriedly complimented, the emperor is in his prime, and Daki is in need of you. God will give you a long life. Chi Ziyuan shook his head amusedly, I can't live to be 100 years old, it would be nice to live to be 40. Chi Ziyuan said this sincerely, who doesn't want to live a long life? But he knows his physical condition. Although the doctor said that he has been adjusted well, he has the feeling that there are still many hidden dangers in his body. He is already very satisfied to live past 40. No one thought that he could live to be more than 80, and he didn't let go until his son gave the throne to his grandson. At that time, Chi Ziyuan was lying on the rocking chair recalling his life, and said to the great-grandsons who came to listen to the story, your ancestors made 3 most correct decisions in this life. Your 4th grandpa married your 4th grandma, the 3rd is that you rebelled after listening to Yuan Hui Kuashi's words. The mischievous great-grandsons asked confusedly, old ancestor, why is it that the 4th grandpa married the 4th grandma? What does this have to do with fighting the country? Chi Ziyuan ignored them and continued, the relationship is getting bigger. My ancestors didn't see much before, but now standing behind and looking forward, many things can be revealed. Many things that your ancestors and I did, it's all because of your 4th grandpa's ability, and your 4th grandpa's grandpa was instigated by your 4th grandma, and the prosperity of Daki today is all because of the things that your ancestors and I did to lay the foundation. But my father said that it was the emperor's wise grandfather who created a prosperous world. Chi Ziyuan curled his lips in disdain, and said, I built your grandfather's country, and I also established the foundation. If you want to be wise, you are also wise from your ancestors. Now I will test you, whether it is your ancestors who are wise, or your emperor's grandfather, wise. When Qi Wenchen came over with lunch, he just heard these words. He gave his father a helpless look, and said, of course, father is wise, wise father, come and have lunch. Chi Ziyuan looked at the things he brought with disgust, and said, why are these soups? What about the braised pork I want to eat? Qi Wenchen smiled at him ingratiatingly, and said, the braised pork has been plundered by 4th uncle. Although these dishes are a little bland, they are made by my son himself. You can try them and see if they are good. If they are delicious, my son will make them for you next time. Chi Ziyuan took a sip in disgust, and said, since when do you have to cook by yourself? My son is also in Zen now. If you have nothing to do, you can study cooking skills. Tell your son what kind of food you want to eat, and your son will cook it for you after he learns. Chi Ziyuan snorted, I dare not let you do it, otherwise I won't be able to eat what I like for a whole year. The older Chi Ziyuan was, the more he liked greasy and soft food, but the imperial physician told him to eat more bland food. In order to make Chi Ziyuan give up his hobby, Qi Wenchen tried his best to cook for his father himself. Seeing his grandson and great-grandson staring at him feeding, Qi Wenchen gave them a friendly smile, I made a lot of food, do you want to try it too? The children scattered in fright. The youngest great-grandson fell to the ground with a slap because of fright. He didn't wait for the nanny to get up and continued to run forward. Seeing his brother and uncles running, he disappeared, so he chased after him crying loudly, don't leave me behind, I don't want to eat the food made by my great-grandfather. In just one sentence, the round body immediately turned a corner and disappeared, and his loud crying echoed in his ears. Qi Wenchen narrowed his eyes and said, that's the 2nd child of the 3rd family, right? How old is this year? Qi Wenchen's head supervisor wiped off his cold sweat and said, back to the Supreme Emperor, the young master is only 3 years old this year. Qi Wenchen snorted, it's pretty fast, next time he comes, I'll give him a copy of the one I made myself and go early. The chief internal supervisor looked at Qi Ziyuan. Chi Xiaoyuan drank the soup without saying a word. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1384. Fan Zijin and Chi Heiran liked to get together since they could crawl. Even if their nurses separated them, Fan Zijin could still point to the outside and say ah. There is no way, Xiaotong can only raise the two children in one room. Not to mention, maybe there is a little partner, the two children no longer need to be coaxed when they are eating, they are rushing to eat, and they are obedient when they sleep, as long as they make a gesture of taking the other away. The child was immediately honest. Although Chi Heiran was 2 months younger than Fan Zijin, he was abused when he was younger, and when he was brought to Fan's house, he was a small group. Xiaotong once thought that the child would not be able to support him, but this kid has a good foundation and is willing to eat and sleep. After being sent to Fan's house for less than 4 months, he immediately surpassed Fan Zijin, and now he is white and fat, and looks stronger than Fan Zijin, who was 2 months older than him. The two little friends talked endlessly every day. Fan Zijin was willing to share toys with his younger brother when he felt sorry for him, but Chi Heiran forced him to talk if he didn't want him, and lectured with a stern face. Chi Heiran listened blankly. Xiaotong didn't know if he understood, but she didn't understand anyway. Fan Zijin is only 8 months old, and he still can't speak, but he talks a lot, and talks to Chi Heiran every day with awe. Chi Heiran could barely sit up right now, and he had to lean against the quilt, so he couldn't crawl around as flexibly as his cousin, and naturally he couldn't choose his favorite toy, he had to take whatever Fan Zijin forced him to. But this kid has a very bad temper. When he sees something he doesn't like, he just throws it away. Fan Zijin thought that his younger brother was going to play with him, and he happily crawled to pick it up as soon as his younger brother threw it away, and he was so happy to pick it up again after his younger brother threw it away. Xiaotong was speechless as she watched her nephew teasing the dog, and her son was the puppy who was still wagging its tail after being teased. At the beginning, Chi Heiran was angry that his brother forced him to stuff something he didn't like. After throwing it away a few times, he thought the game was quite fun, and immediately became addicted to it at night. Every time he threw something out and saw his brother crawling to pick it up, he immediately giggled. Laugh out loud. Seeing that they were happy, Xiaotong didn't interfere. But Fan Zijin's situation of one person being the master of two only lasted for less than 2 months, because Chi Heiran learned to crawl. This kid's motor nerves are stronger than Fan Zijin's by a little bit. As soon as he was able to sit still, he immediately moved his buttocks and crawled twice. Maybe there was an older brother who often crawled around as a reference. After only one night, he learned to crawl with both hands and legs, and after 3 days he could crawl behind and chase his brother. In less than a month, Chi Heiran was able to flexibly press on Fan Zijin's body and laughed. Xiaotong picked up his nephew helplessly, hugged his tearful son in his arms and said, "You are too stupid, why are you bullied by your younger brother instead? Perhaps Chi Heiran's force is too strong, and Fan Zijin can't catch up. Since he was a baby, he has been seeking another way of development, intelligence. His IQ has grown explosively." The reason why he said this is that since this kid was suppressed by his younger brother and snatched the steamed buns, he learned from the pain and started a counter-attack with IQ. Every time after Chi Heiran snatched his food, he could always ask for the food back. With the growth of age and the polarization of the growth of the two, the priorities of the cousins also began to be determined. Since the two children could walk and talk, Fan Zijin became the leader of the duo, and Chi Heiran followed Fan Zijin's ass every time. Fan Zijin wanted to eat snacks, so he let Chi Heiran out of the kitchen, and the boy climbed in through the window to steal snacks. Fan Zijin was beaten by Fan Zixiao, so he turned to Chi Heiran to find bugs in the garden and stuff them into Fan Zixiao's clothes. Fan Zijin came up with the idea of many things, as small as what to play, as big as playing tricks on the family's concubines and aunts, and Chi-Heiran implemented them, turning the originally quiet and gloomy Fan's mansion into a bustle like a vegetable market. But Fan Sai-wen seldom took care of the affairs of the inner house, unless Xia Tong bullied the concubine's concubine and concubine, he seldom intervened, let alone the teasing of 2 or 3-year-old children. He didn't take it seriously. Xia Tong just talked about the 2 children, and didn't punish them severely, so the 2 little friends grew up like this. It was when he was 5 years old that Fan Zijian and Fan Zixiao became rivals and made him feel bad for his father. Fan Sai-wen is partial to the eldest son, and always feels that Xia Tong will treat his son badly, so he suppresses Xia Tong and Fan Zijian everywhere at home. Although Fan Zijian is still a child, he is very sensitive. It is obvious that his father likes his eldest brother and dislikes him, but all children like their father and even worship him. When Fan Zijian was very young, in order to get his father's love, he dragged Chi-Heiran to follow Fan Zixiao as a younger brother, trying to win his father's love by pleasing his elder brother. But Fan Zixiao was older than Fan Zijian, and it was the most domineering and mischievous time when he was 4 or 5 years old, so he was not very patient with his younger brother and cousin who were still staggering when they walked. He reminded him 10,000 times that he was not allowed to play with his second younger brother, so that if something happened, his mother would not plant it on him. In addition, Fan Zijian and Chi-Heiran both eat and use food better than him. How can a 4 or 5-year-old child be convinced? Although Fan Zijian was not loved by his father, he was Xia Tong's son who was born with great difficulty, so he was raised in the palm of his hand, so he dumped the bastard Fan Zixiao for a long time regardless of food and clothing. At that time, Fan Zijian was only over 1 year old, and he was still a little shaky when he walked. He just subconsciously wanted to play with his older brother, and hoped to make his father like him by doing so, so when he was pushed to the ground by Fan Zixiao, he was still a little dazed. I don't understand why the brother who played well beat him. He was stunned, but Chi-Heiran was not. Fan Zixiao just pushed Fan Zijian down. He rushed forward like a cannonball, knocked him down, then pressed on him and grabbed his face. Fan Zixiao was terrified and began to cry loudly. The maids and mothers were also frightened, and hurried forward to hug the 3 children away. After that incident, the 3 children became hostile to each other. Fan Zijian and Chi-Heiran bullied Fan Zixiao from time to time, and Fan Zixiao also bullied him from time to time. Hit back the 2 younger brothers. But this kind of trouble is small. Just because you pushed me, I robbed you of a toy, you stuffed a bug into my clothes, I sprinkled a handful of sand into your meal, etc. When Fan Sai-wen saw them, he treated them as brothers and sisters, and he didn't care when he saw that they were enjoying themselves. Xia Tong also thought it was a child's trouble, so he didn't intervene. So, when Fan Zijian was 5 years old, things went off the rails. At that time, Fan Zixiao was already 8 years old. He had been enlightened for 2 years, he also had his own children outside, and he knew the difference between his mother-in-law and concubine. Coupled with his aunt's indoctrination, his father's preference made him more and more hostile to Fan Zijian. But Fan Zijian was still stuck in the idea that my brother bullied me, and I fought back at his children's play, and did not link these fights with interests. That day, Fan Zijian and Chi-Heiran got rid of the string of servants following them and ran to the edge of the lotus pond. The 2 boys just learned from the boy next to them that the earth dragon can be used for fishing. They just dug the earth dragon from the garden, and they are squatting by the lotus pond trying to use the earth dragon to lure the fish inside. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1385. Fan Zixiao was hiding under a tree to endorse a book. His father promised him that as long as he could get his husband's praise, he would take him to the streets this mid-autumn festival, and only take him alone. Seeing Fanzaijan foolishly leading Chi-Heiran to pinch the earth dragon to lure fish in the water, he couldn't help curling his lips in disdain. He put his eyes back on the book, but couldn't read it no matter what. My aunt said that if he wanted to get ahead, he had to study hard, and he had to do better and be better than his younger brother, because he was a concubine and his brother was a concubine. He has owned everything since he was born. From now on, his father's favor and the Fan family's ancestral property belong to him, and even more than half of the Fan family's property belongs to him, and the rest is divided equally between him and his younger brothers. Fan Zixiao looked at the words in the book and suddenly became irritable. He was obviously his father's eldest son, and his father liked him the most. Why should he be a head shorter than him just because he was a concubine? Looking at the two stupid children, his face became even more ugly. Fanzaijan is so stupid, but just because he knows how to reincarnate, he has everything. Fanzaijan was lying on the edge of the pond, trying to stare at the fish in the water with his eyes wide open, covered by a shadow. He looked up and saw Fan Zixiao, and immediately said unhappily, "You are blocking my sight." Fanzaijan pursed his lips tightly, clenched his fists and said, "Why are you so stupid? Fishing requires a hook, but you fish with your hands." Fanzaijan was taken aback for a moment, then despised him and said, "You are stupid, don't we know that fishing requires a hook? It's just where did we get the hook?" Chi-Heiran stood up in a daze, stopped them and said, "Okay, stop arguing, we don't have fish hooks, we can do it." In fact, Fanzaijan had never seen a fish hook, or even seen anyone fishing. Others had their father with them, but his father never cared about him, so his eldest cousin came to take them out to play or teach them how to ride horses from time to time. Seeing that Fan Zixiao knew more than him, he subconsciously didn't want to admit defeat. He knew that his father liked Big Brother better, and his father must have told him about fishing. Fanzaijan teased Chi-Heiran unhappily and said, "Let's ignore him, we'll ask the nanny what to do with fishhook in a while." The two friends leaned together to discuss the matter of making fishhooks, but Fan Zixiao was immersed in his own world. Looking at Fanzaijan's smiling face, he murmured, "You are too stupid, you are not worthy to be your father's child." Thinking of this, Fan Zixiao's heart became ruthless. He felt his heart beating like thunder. He took 2 steps forward, and pushed Fanzaijan down the lotus pond. Fanzaijan screamed, and the sound of plopping into the water brought Fan Zixiao back to his mind. Seeing Fanzaijan struggling in the water, his face turned pale, and he took 2 steps back abruptly, shouting, "This is none of my business." This series of movements was just 2 breaths of effort. The 5-year-old Chi-Heiran was furious, turned around and pushed Fan Zixiao to the ground, then turned around and jumped into the water to pull Fanzaijan. In fact, the place where Fanzaijan fell into the water was not deep, but to the waist of an adult, but it was a disaster for a 5-year-old child. In addition, Fanzaijan fell into the water suddenly, drifting farther and farther in panic, and the mud at the bottom of the lotus pond was very thick. Fanzaijan's little feet sank into the ground as soon as they touched the ground. This soft and weak feeling made Fanzaijan terrified, and he choked on several saliva. Although Chi-Heiran is only 5 years old, he has been practicing martial arts since he was 3 years old, and he has been practicing martial arts for 2 years. His ability to deal with danger is not a little better than Fanzaijan's, and he can't swim, but he is smart. Raised his internal strength, and immediately rushed over against the water. Chi-Heiran grabbed Fanzaijan, raised his internal strength, pulled him out of the water, and threw him into the grass on the bank before he could react. Although he used a lot of skill, he still threw Fanzaijan hard enough. As soon as he fell to the ground, he couldn't help spitting out the water in his stomach, and then remembered to cry. He wiped away his tears and went to Chi-Heiran, only to find that he thrashing in the water as if exhausted. His complexion suddenly changed, and he shouted, Cousin. Come on quickly. Cousin fell into the water. Fan Zijan cried and yelled, and ran to the pond to reach out to Chi Heiran, but Chi Heiran was already a long way from the shore at this time, and he didn't know how to swim at all, and he only rescued Fan Zijan with the help of recoil and internal force. After saving the person, there is nothing he can do. Fortunately, the servants of the two children have been looking for the two of them. Ben has already found this place. Hearing the cry just now, he rushed over immediately. When a woman saw the child sinking in the water, her expression changed, and she immediately rushing down to pick up Chi Heiran. Chi Heiran choked in the water longer than Fan Zijan, and his face turned blue when he was rescued. Fan Zijan sat down beside him and cried loudly wow. When Xia Tong rushed over, Chi Heiran had almost vomited up the water in her stomach. She was startled and frightened. She hugged Chi Heiran and said to the servants angrily, "How do you see children? How can you let them be in such a dangerous situation where?" The servants immediately knelt together. Fan Zijan came back to his senses and screamed, "Fan Zixiao pushed me down, he's a bad guy." Xia Tong was startled. She didn't see Fan Zixiao when she looked left and right. She asked with a gloomy expression, "Zijan, you said it was your elder brother who pushed you down. It was he who pushed it? Brother Heiran jumped to save me. He is a bad guy, a big bad guy." Xia Tong said with a livid face, "Go and bring the eldest young master, I want to ask him why he killed his siblings." Chi Heiran and Fan Zijan were sent back to the house to change clothes, drink ginger soup, and see a doctor by the way. Both children were terrified and hugged each other to comfort each other. Chi Heiran was still shaking, but said, "Look, let me say that I am better than you, let me be your brother in the future." Fan Zijan thought for a while, then nodded reluctantly and said, "Then let you be my brother for 3 days, because you are sick, I don't care about you." Chi Heiran pursed his lips, turned over and said, "I'm not sick." But Chi Heiran was still sick, had a fever, fell into a coma, and seemed to be on fire. Fan Zijan sat on the side and wiped his tears. He felt that he had to tell his eldest cousin about this and let him avenge them. He touched Chi Heiran's face, and whispered, "You wait here, I'll let my cousin come to see you." Fan Zijan walked out while wiping away tears. There was no servant outside. His mother's drinking came from the main room, followed by the sound of porcelain falling. He frowned slightly, but turned around to look. In the room, Xia Tong was confronting Fan Siwen. "Do you suspect that Zijan slandered Zixiao?" Fan Siwen looked at her with a cold face and said meaningfully, "I never said that, he is only 5 years old, what can he know?" He took a deep breath and said, "I know you blame me for being partial to Zixiao and Lu Shi, but Zijin is a descendant, he is born with everything." "You think I ordered Zijan to slander Zixiao?" Xia Tong interrupted him with a cold face, heartbroken, and asked, "Am I that kind of person?" Fan Siwen, ask yourself, am I that kind of person? Fan Siwen remained silent, but looked at her firmly, and said, Zixiao is only 8 years old and timid, do you think he would do something like push his brother into the water? The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1386. He was the one who pushed me into the water. Fan Zijan pushed the door open and went in, raised his face to look at him persistently, and said word by word, he was the one who pushed me down, father, I'm not lying. Fan Siwen's face was a little ugly, he looked at his son for a while, then turned to look at his wife, Zijin, Zixiao is your elder brother, father hopes that you brothers and sisters can help each other, your elder brother and you there may be some small conflicts, but you are brothers after all. Fan Siwen, Xia Tong interrupted him loudly, don't you just want to say that I ordered Zijin to frame Zixiao? You don't have to say these high-sounding words, let me tell you, Fan Zixiao will become what he is today. It's caused by your indiscriminate relationship with concubines. Fan Siwen was annoyed, since when did I not distinguish between the concubine and the concubine? I have never lost the dignity that should be given to you, and Zixiao is also my blood. Fan Zijin turned around and left. He didn't know how many quarrels he had heard. He knew that either his father slammed the door and left, or his mother chased his father and beat him. Although he felt uncomfortable before, he would not be as angry as he is now. As long as Fan Zijin thought of the panic of being pushed into the water and Chi Heiran lying on the bed with a fever, his heart was filled with hostility. Fan Zijin walked out of the main courtyard, found the wet nurse, and said, "You asked someone to invite the eldest cousin, and you said that the cousin was sick." The nurse hurriedly responded and left. Fan Zijin turned around and went back to stay beside Chi Heiran. He thought, since his father didn't believe his words, then he would personally make Fan Zixiao pay for what he did. Chi Heiran has a good foundation. Even though he had the fever for half the night, he got better as soon as the fever subsided, got up the next morning and ate 2 bowls of gruel, 2 small steamed buns. Once he wiped his mouth, he became a mischievous little bastard again. Fan Zijin was much calmer than before. He slowly finished his breakfast, put down the bowl and chopsticks and said to his father, "Father, I will prove it to you." After finishing speaking, he pulled Chi Heiran away. Fan Siwen was confused. He had already forgotten what happened yesterday afternoon, so he didn't know what his son was going to prove to him. Xia Tong didn't take it to heart either. The 2 children walked out of the main room hand in hand. Fan Zijin turned to the servants and said, "Go back 15 steps." The maids and women looked at each other, and stepped back 15 steps in small steps. Seeing them stepping back on tiptoe, Fan Zijin wrinkled his nose, pointed to a pot of chrysanthemums and said, "Go back there." The maids and women grimaced, but they still backed away according to their words, and their eyes were fixed on the 2 children, for fear that they would accidentally run out of their sight. You must know that because of what happened yesterday, they could not a lot of boards have been written down, and they will be beaten in turn in the next few days. Fan Zijin was satisfied after confirming that they couldn't hear them, and leaned into Chi Heiran's ear and said, "Let's go find Fan Zixiao." Chi Heiran hated Fan Zixiao very much, wrinkled his nose and said, "I'm not going, I hate him." Fan Zijin snorted coldly, "He pushed me into the water and almost killed you, thinking that with the support of his father, this matter will be over. What do you want?" "Humph, I want him to taste the feeling of being flooded." Chi Heiran hesitated and said, "This is not good, it is so uncomfortable to fall into the water." He still hasn't forgotten the feeling of suffocation and choking yesterday. Fan Zijin's face became even colder, so he should be punished even more. Fan Zixiao was confined in the room by Fan Siwen. Theoretically, he was not allowed to go out or let people visit him, but Fan Zijin broke in like Chi Heiran's little overlord. The people who served Fan Zixiao were afraid of hurting the 2 little masters, and was afraid that they would conflict with their masters, so they didn't dare to stop them, but they didn't dare to let them in. So, the 3 confronted each other with a group of servants between them. Fan Zijin laughed at Fan Zixiao, "You are a coward. Not only do you refuse to recognize someone you pushed, you even dare not see us." Fan Zixiao's face was ugly. He straightened his body and said, "Who said I dare not see you?" His eyes flickered, and he said with a guilty conscience, "I was studying in the garden yesterday, but I haven't seen you, let alone push you. Then do you dare to confront us at the edge of the lotus pond? At that time, there were things you dropped and your footprints." Fan Zixiao's complexion changed, his eyes flickered twice, and then he snorted, "Just go, I'm afraid you won't make it." "Eldest young master, the master ordered you to be grounded. You won't be able to go anywhere these few days." Fan Zixiao's wet nurse hurried to stop him. Fan Zijin and Chi Heiran made faces at him, and said to him, "Coward, you can't even get rid of the servants around you. If you have the ability, come and chase us, otherwise you will be a coward without courage, worse than a mouse. After that, the two brothers turned and ran. The servants of the two hurriedly followed up. Fan Xiao's face turned red, he pushed the nanny away, and chased after her. He hated people calling him a coward the most. Because he is a concubine, his aunt often tells him to endure outside. Will he become a coward? The three children ran after each other to the lotus pond. Fan Xiao clenched his fists tightly. Seeing the servants scattered around, he could only suppress the panic in his heart and said, "Don't try to frame me, I didn't do it yesterday. I have been to the lotus pond, it is impossible to push you down. My aunt said that this matter cannot be confessed to death, otherwise not only will he lose his father's favor, but he will also be charged with murdering his younger brother, and he will never get better in the future." Fan Zijian sneered, pointed to the ground next to him and said, "You still don't admit it, but you accidentally left it behind." Fan Xiao panicked, and quickly took 2 steps forward to look at him. Fan Zijian jumped behind him in a flash, stretched out his hand and pushed the person down. Fan Xiao let out a cry, and couldn't help thumping in the water, shouting help. The servants were taken aback, they didn't expect Fan Zijian to push someone into the water in front of them, and when he was about to go into the water to save him, Fan Zijian stopped them and said, "No one is allowed to go down." Chi Heiran was still a little nervous at the side, but when he saw Fan Xiao who was screaming in the water with his eyes closed, he couldn't help being speechless, and shouted loudly, "Don't scream, the water will reach your chest, it won't even submerge you. What's your name, your muzzle?" The anxious servants were stunned for a moment, and hurriedly stretched their heads to look. Sure enough, although the young master kept screaming and thumping, the water did not actually cover his face, and everyone was speechless. Fan Xiao also gradually came to his senses. Seeing his embarrassment being seen by so many people, and the servants might still be laughing at him in his heart, he couldn't help but get red-eyed and glared at the two of them angrily. Fan Zijian looked at him coldly with a small face and said, "I am younger than you. I was choked after being pushed into the water by you yesterday, and my cousin almost died. You can stand on the ground and stare at us now, but you were just taken aback. Why do you hate us?" Fan Xiao turned his head guiltily. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1387. None of the people present were fools. How could they not know the truth when they saw the reaction of the young master? Even Fan Xiao's wet nurse who rushed over saw his guilty conscience and knew that it must have been Fan Xiao who pushed Fan Zijian into the water and refused to admit it. She glanced at everyone and knew that this matter could not be concealed. The young master dared to push his younger brother into the water at such a young age. Rumor has it that what future does the young master have? Fan Xiao's wet nurse could think of this, and the people beside Fan Zijian and Chi Heiran could also think of it. They looked at each other, and began to stop the servant who was about to get into the water intentionally or unintentionally. Because the young master and the others were not only beaten, but also fined monthly. The most important thing is that the master favors the young master and always makes the second young master suffer. Even those who serve with them are always despised by other people in the house. Fan Zijian and Chi Heiran didn't expect it to be so deep. Seeing Fan Xiao in a mess, they immediately cheered up, stood on the bank and made faces at him, saying, "It's what you deserve. Do you dare to push us next time?" Fan Zijian, Fan Siwen yelled, and walked over with a frosty face. Fan Zijian was startled, and stood there with a pale face. Chi Heiran was also frightened, but he still took a step forward and blocked Fan Zijian behind him, stammering with a pale face, "Auntie, uncle, I pushed him down." Fan Siwen took a deep breath, forced a smile on Chi Heiran, and said, "Heiran, get out of the way. When he pushed people, he was under the watchful eyes of everyone, you can't take the blame." Fan Zijian was furious when he heard the words, pushed Chi Heiran away and straightened his chest and said, "What if I pushed him? He pushed me first, and I was almost drowned at that time, because there were only the three of us when he pushed me. You don't believe it when the person is there? Are you blind? There is mud on his clothes, and there are his footprints here. You are biased, you are biased. Pa, Fan Siwen couldn't help but slap him. Fan Zijan's ears were ringing, and he couldn't hear the sound of the outside world for a while. He only saw Chi Heiran stepping forward to hug him, and glaring at his father angrily. He suddenly felt very sad in his heart, and tears flowed down his face. Fan Siwen looked at the mourning and crying son, his body froze for a moment, and he felt a little regretful in his heart. Seeing that the eldest son had been pulled up, he hesitated for a moment and was about to go forward and pull up the son who had been knocked down by him. However, Fan Zijan had already recovered a bit, and glared at Fan Zixiao resentfully, got up with a tear, pulled Chi Heiran and ran away. Fan Siwen looked at the two children running away with an ugly expression, and could only turn his head to the servant and the eldest son, who shrank aside. He coldly warned the servants, "No one is allowed to spread what happened today." Then he said to Fan Zixiao, "You don't have to go to school these days, you should confine yourself at home and think about your mistakes." Fan Siwen looked for Xiaotong gloomily. The incident was too big and there were too many people who witnessed it. Xiaotong must cooperate if he wants to completely cut off the spread of news. Of course, Fan Siwen was not a fool. Even Fan Zijan was able to find the evidence he had enumerated, and he would not be ignorant of it. But at first he really didn't believe it was Zixiao who pushed Zijan into the water. Fan Zixiao is only 8 years old this year, and he has always been timid and cowardly. When he first heard that Fan Zijan accused his elder brother of pushing him into the water, he couldn't believe it. The first feeling was that Xiaotong asked Zijan to slander him in order to suppress the eldest son and the Lu family. But after yesterday's quarrel, his rationality gradually returned. His wife's grief and indignation were not fake, and Fan Zijan's look in defense was impressive to him, so he couldn't help but go to Fan Zixiao for questioning. At that time, Fan Zixiao was sitting on the bed and shivering with the quilt rolled up. Fan Siwen could tell something was wrong at a glance. If he was really studying in the garden at that time, the incident of Zijan and Heiran falling into the water had nothing to do with him at all. Why should he bother? Afraid of becoming like this? If Zijan and Heiran were slandered for no reason, these two boys would definitely jump up in anger. Even though Zixiao was timid, it was not that he was not angry at all, on the contrary, he was so afraid. Fan Siwen's face darkened, asking people to take out the clothes he was wearing today to see what else they don't know. Zijan said that after Zixiao pushed him down, he was furious, and pushed Zixiao into a fight. The mud by the lotus pond was not hard, and since he fell to the ground, he would always come back with something on it. Fan Siwen took a serious look at the eldest son, and didn't say much. He knew that this matter should not be spread, otherwise the eldest son's future in this life would be over. Murdering his younger brother, with vicious thoughts, and the most sensitive concubine murdering his first son. Fan Siwen really felt sorry for his son, so he asked someone to wipe off these traces secretly. Where can there be any left footprints by the lotus pond? He knew that he was sorry for Xiaotong and Zijan, but he didn't dare to let them know, otherwise something might happen with Xiaotong's intransigence. But he didn't expect Fan Zijan to be so staunch and vicious at such a young age. He even pushed his elder brother into the water, so that what happened yesterday was revealed in full view. This matter must not be spread, otherwise not only Zixiao will be destroyed, but Zijan will also be criticized. Just after Yij, he just pushed people into the water just to vent his anger and make Zixiao admit that he was the one who pushed. People outside would say that Fan Zixiao was vicious, but how bad is he? His Fan family has 2 rebellious sons at once, and the future children will also be affected. Xiaotong's eyes widened. She didn't expect her son to do such a thing. She became anxious. A gentleman, if his son's extreme behavior was spread. Xiaotong's face was ugly. She was about to ask her husband for help when she caught a glimpse of his gloomy face. Her heart stopped for a moment, and then she became sad. Fan Siwen came to her after the accident, didn't say what to do, but only told her that Zijin pushed him into the water, but deliberately played down the matter of Fan Zixiao, which shows that he was guarding against her. Xiaotong became annoyed and said, "Let's spread the word. Zijin is only 5 years old. What does he know? It's just that he has been wronged and wants to get justice." Fan Siwen's face froze, knowing that Hui would not be his wife. At this moment, Fan Zijin was curling up in the corner of the wall sadly and crying, while Qi Heiran was circling anxiously, and asked in a childish voice, "I'll call you back for you, stop crying." Fan Zijin lowered his head and ignored him, and said aggrievedly after a while, "Why doesn't father like me?" Qi Heiran scratched his head, and said, "My elder brother said that some people's hearts are born with a partiality. It's a disease and it can't be cured. My father doesn't like me either. He doesn't like us, and we don't like him either. All right." Fan Zijin felt even more aggrieved, "But I just think he likes me." Qi Heiran's small face was wrinkled, his round face was full of embarrassment, and finally he gritted his teeth and said, "Then I will study hard with you. I heard that adults like children who can read well. You are smart now, you can honor your ancestors, and my uncle will like you." Fan Zijin raised his face full of tears and asked, "Who told you?" "My nanny said it," Qi Heiran said triumphantly. "The nanny told me that adults like obedient, sensible, and smart children. If I do this, even if I didn't grow up around my father will like it too." Mine. Fan Zijin pondered. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1388. Fan Zijin wiped away his tears, pulled Qi Heiran and ran home to find his mother. He was going to school, and he would definitely leave his elder brother behind. He said confidently, "I have written 1000-character classic and 3-character classic. If I have recognized all the characters in, I will definitely be better than Fan Zixiao." Qi Heiran had a bitter face, and said in a low voice, "I still want to go to school 2 years later. No, you have to go to study with me. I want to impress my father, and you should also impress my uncle." There was no one in the main room, and his mother's crying came from the room. His face changed, and he hurriedly shook off Qi Heiran's hand and ran over. Fan Siwen said helplessly to Xiaotong, "Didn't I promise you that I would let you raise Haoran? Why are you crying?" The two children who were about to run into the house froze for a moment and stood where they were. "Don't worry, I will deal with Qi Feng's place. I will do what I say. As long as Heiran is unwilling to go back, I will definitely not let him pick him up." Xiaotong was not moved. She wiped away her tears and said with a sneer, "This is our deal, in exchange for your eldest son's reputation and future." Fan Siwen's complexion was ugly. Xiaotong shook off his hand, turned his back and said, "You go, I just want to tell you, not only Fan Zixiao is your son, Zijin is also your son, don't you too much favoritism." Fan Zixiao's face turned livid, and he couldn't help but said, "How many times do you want me to tell you? My heart for the two children is the same, but Zixiao is a bastard, he has no mother, so naturally I have to favor him more. Aren't I his mother?" Xiaotong couldn't help getting angry again, turned around and said angrily, "Could it be that I'm dead? You are the aunt, not his biological mother. Can you treat Zixiao and Zijin exactly the same? And Lu is just a concubine, who has no right to speak in the family. I just take care of him more and you are like that, get angry." Fan Zijin felt cold all over his body, looked coldly at his parents who were arguing again, and pulled Qi Heiran to turn around and leave. Neither of the couple in the house noticed the two children who appeared and then left. Chi Heiran was confused and asked, "Why can't I understand what my aunt and uncle are talking about?" Fan Zijian's face was gloomy, and he said, "Father used you to threaten mother to benefit his beloved son." With a cold light in his eyes, he said, "I will be better than Fan Zixiao." He took Chi Heiran's hand and said, "Don't go back to Chi's house, or you will be bullied to death, isn't it Fan Zixiao? I can bear it." Chi Heiran didn't understand, but he did. In order to keep his mother and him from bringing up the matter of falling into the water yesterday, his father promised to stop Chi Feng and let Chi Heiran grow up under Fan's parents. Fan Zijian knew that Chi Heiran was not his own younger brother, but his cousin. It was impossible for the Chi family to let Chi Heiran grow up in Fan's family forever. When he was enlightened, he would definitely take him back. He heard more than once that his mother and eldest cousin they discussed sending Heiran to Uncle Zhu's house, so that even if the Chi family wanted to snatch him back, there was nothing they could do. But if he could stay here, it would be better to stay with him and his big cousin. When the two children went back in the evening, Xiaotong really took their little hands and said, "You are not allowed to say anything about yesterday and today. You forget about these two things, do you understand?" The two children lowered their heads and nodded. They felt that although revenge was important, it was obviously more important for the two little friends to be together. Seeing that they were well behaved, Xiaotong couldn't help but sighed, rubbed the heads of the two children and said, "You are too strong, even if Zixiao is wrong, you can't push him into the water just because of this." Although Xiaotong hated Fan Zixiao, he didn't want his son and nephew to become the kind of people who would get revenge, so he took them to lecture them. The little Chi Heiran sat on the chair and listened earnestly, but Fan Zijian was a little absent-minded. There were too many things that happened in the past 2 days, too many for his little head to think about, but he vaguely knew that benefits can be obtained. In exchange, even love is fine. Regardless of whether the love exchanged is true or not, but I feel comfortable, right? Fan Zijian realized that it was impossible for his father to love him more than his eldest brother, because it was impossible for him to become a bastard son with only his father, and it seemed that it was a mistake for him to be born a legitimate son. Fan Zijian, who has not yet divided into concubine and concubine, does not understand the complexity of it, but after he grows up and gets in touch with people and people outside, he realizes that most of the other families are biased towards the concubine, while the opposite of his family is the rare one. It is so rare that it can be called a wonderful work. But he didn't know it at this time, he was just studying hard and trying to gain more weight for himself, so that he could use it to deal with his father in the future. Fan Zijian learned to read at the age of 3, and was officially enlightened at the age of 5. By the time he was 9 years old, he had left far behind the 12-year-old Fan Zixiao, because in this year he took part in the children's examination under the suggestion of his husband, and won the first prize in one fell swoop. He was qualified as a child, and even got the head of the case, and became a man of influence in the academy for a while. 12-year-old Fan Zixiao also took part in the exam, but unfortunately he didn't pass the exam. The master read the answer sheet he copied and asked him to keep working hard, but when he turned around, he caught Fan Zijian, who was a bit smug, and taught him a lesson, the example of herding Zhonyang. "Have you forgotten? I don't think you will be able to take part in next year's college exam, it's important to study hard behind closed doors." Fan Zijian's eyes widened, and he pouted in dissatisfaction. "Why? A 9-year-old scholar is so sweet." The gentleman knocked him on the head, and said, "You won the top 3 in the county test and the government test, and you won the first place in the government test. If the score in the hospital test is too bad, wouldn't the good results in the first 2 games be for nothing, gone?" The gentleman stroked his beard and said, "With your talents, it is obviously impossible to get the top 3 in the college examination in the spring of next year, so you should calm down and read more books." Fanzaijan had no choice but to go out to look for Chi-Heiran with his head down, and said slightly dissatisfied, "I have read the examination papers of the previous year's college examinations, and I don't think it is very difficult." "Then can you get the top 3 in your answer sheet?" Fanzaijan tilted his head and thought for a while, then shook his head and said, "It's difficult." "Then wait another 2 years, you're still young anyway." Fanzaijan gave him a blank look, and said, "It's a shame that you took the county exam with me, and you don't even understand this. If you miss the college exam next year, you'll have to wait until the next year. The county examination and the government examination are held every year, but the hospital examination is held twice every 3 years." He was 12 years old then. Fanzaijan sighed sadly, and said, "I originally wanted to create a myth of genius so that my father would know how good I am, but my husband objected so strongly in order to let me get a good ranking, so I can only obey." Chi-Heiran saw that his appearance of lamenting but showing off was really hateful, so he jumped up and scratched him. In order to encourage Fanzaijan, Chi-Heiran also took the county test with him. As a result, he almost handed in a blank paper and got 3 answers. It was because he happened to review it when he was reviewing with Fanzaijan. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1389. Fan Saiwen was naturally happy when his son passed the Tongsheng entrance examination at a young age. Although he still had a straight face, he gave his son a set of precious 4 treasures of the study and a single copy. Fanzaijan was no longer a Mon Underwu in the past. His father's eccentricity made him feel a little chilled in recent years, but he was still happy to receive his gift. He even thought in his heart, if he was better, would his father's heart be more righteous? At this moment, he no longer wanted his father to turn his heart towards him, he just needed him to be fair. The most important thing is that Fanzaijan has understood that based on the current relationship between their father and son, he will have little to rely on his father in the future, and he will rely on himself in the future. He thinks he is smart and talented, so naturally he does not want to. "I stayed at home all my life and watched my parents quarrel, and fought with my brother-in-law for the poor father's love." He wants to go out and break out of his own piece of sky. In the future, he will go further and stand taller than his father, and he will look down on him from a height, and give shelter to those he cares about, such as his mother, such as Chi-Heiran. With such a dream in mind, Fanzaijan was complacent for a while, and then devoted himself to the ocean of books with greater perseverance. Seeing that he was working hard, the gentleman nodded in satisfaction, thinking that Fanzaijan's future was limitless. He was really good. He got the 4th place in the college examination at the age of 12, although it was only the 4th place, it was enough to make the gentleman of the academy ecstatic. There are many scholars in the south of the Yangtze River, and Linnan Prefecture is the capital city, with more talents. The places where the competition for the imperial examination in the Great Zhou dynasty is the most fierce are the areas in the south of the Yangtze River and Shandong. However, Shandong was already occupied by Dajin. After the imperial court fled to the south, most of the literati were concentrated in Jiangnan, which shows how competitive the imperial examinations are. And Fanzaijan was able to enter the top 4 at the young age of 12, which can predict his future. As long as he is not too pedantic, he can predict his day in the first place. Therefore, the gentlemen of the academy were 100% satisfied with Fanzaijan, and the head of the mountain even deliberately found him to reveal that he wanted to accept him as a disciple. Although Fanzaijan was also proud, he was very respectful to the head of the mountain, and said with a smile, "I need to ask my father and mother before making a decision, but cousin Heiran and I are used to the academy, so we have no plans to change the academy." The head of the mountain froze, and then he remembered the mischievous things Fanzaijan and Chi-Heiran did in the past. He seemed to have discussed with the gentleman to find a way to separate the 2 boys next year. After all, Fanzaijan had already read all the 4 books and 5 classics, but Chi Heiran was still competing with the doctrine of the mean, so it was only natural that they should be divided into classes. This is to give him a notice in advance. If they leave Fanzigen, they will change schools. If they don't leave, he will stay here forever. The head of the mountain blew his beard and stared at Fanzigen, and said, "If you want to stay together, then you should be more honest. Last time, did you mix the salt and sugar in the cafeteria? It made you eat beets in the cafeteria." Fanzigen said with a playful smile, "Master Shan, it's not our fault, someone forced us to bet," saying. "Okay, okay," Shanjiang interrupted him with a wave of his hand, "no matter what your reasons are, if you cause trouble again next time, I will not call your father and mother, but Chi Heiran's father directly. If Chi Feng came to the academy, he would probably take Chi Heiran home and not even attend school. Isn't that the case with the big cousin? If it weren't for the Zhu family still remembering the big cousin, he would have a plan in his heart, and he would probably have been raised by the Qi family to be illiterate and illiterate." Fanzigen solemnly promised, "Don't worry, Master Shan, cousin Heiran and I will be obedient and study hard." The head of the mountain half believed in his promise, and half doubted it, but he waved his hand and let it go, saying, "Now the results are released, you go back and celebrate with your family, and come back to school after 5 days of rest." Fanzigen agreed happily, and turned to look for Chi Heiran, but seeing his serious face, he couldn't help asking, "What's wrong with you?" Chi Heiran said with a sullen face, "I occasionally heard the servants of Chi's mansion say that my father wants to marry the elder brother." Chi Heiran practiced martial arts and had a keen ear, so he could always hear some gossip when he returned to Chi mansion for a short stay. He knew that this was his own advantage, so he never told others, only Fanzigen knew. Fanzigen frowned, and said, "Big cousin is far away at the border, and we can't see each other, how can we kiss?" The words of the matchmaker are the order of the parents. They say that the marriage will be settled at that time. Brother, you have to admit it, and you have to admit it if you don't. Fanzigen was not worried at all, and said with a smile, "Don't you know the temperament of big cousin? It's useless to make a decision. What will my uncle do with him if he doesn't come back to get married? He is a man who can delay time, but a woman can't delay. In Dazhu, men married as early as 14 or 15 years old and married their daughter-in-law, but later, 21 or 2 is also normal, especially for the children of officials and eunuchs. You can choose your daughter-in-law slowly, anyway, you need to collect a few houses first." Although Fanzigen is only 12, he knows all about these things. Chi Heiran felt the same when he heard it, so he stopped worrying, and began to happily discuss with Fanzigen, "How about we go horseback riding in the countryside, and how about we bring a grill to have a barbecue?" Fanzigen tilted his head slightly and said with a smile, "Okay, but it depends on what my mother means. If the family wants to hold a banquet to celebrate, then there is not enough time. Fanzigen's passing the exam is a big event, and it's a good thing." Xiaotong wanted to have a banquet to celebrate, so when Fan Siwen came back, she happily walked behind. "Master, it's rare for our family to have a happy event, why don't we take advantage of this to invite a few close relatives, come to get together?" Xiaotong thought that Fan Siwen would not agree, because he was a very low-key person, but he thought for a while, then nodded and said, "Okay, let's choose a good day and set up a few tables." Xiaotong was taken aback for a moment, then happily said, "I'm going to check the calendar now." He left like a gust of wind. Xiaotong thought it was his son's hard work that made Fan Siwen agree with him, and even Fanzigen thought it was because he gave him a good face, so his father changed his low-key past and wanted to celebrate him for being a scholar. For a moment, Fanzigen was proud and uncomfortable. Chi Heiran felt a little itchy when he saw it, let alone Fanzixiao, who had always been at odds with him. Fanzixiao, who was 15 years old this year, still persevered in participating in the county examination, but unfortunately he still failed to break through, and he is still in vain. This was nothing at all, because 15 years old is still young in the children's examination, and there are also old people with white beard and hair taking the children's examination. Not to mention that he is only 15 years old this year. Even if he is 51, no one will laugh at him. But who let him have a younger brother who was a 9-year-old boy and a 12-year-old student? With the comparison, Fan Xixiao felt that everyone looked at him mockingly, as if they were making fun of him for being overconfident. Now even his father had given up keeping a low profile to cheer up Fan Zijian, and Fan Xixiao became more and more depressed. Seeing this, Fan Siwen became more determined in his mind. On the eve of the banquet, Fan Siwen called Fan Zijian into the study, praised him with great satisfaction, and said, "Zijian, you are more powerful than your father. It seems that father can't help you. Unlike your elder brother, he has accomplished nothing so far." Fan Zijian twitched his brows, feeling that there was nothing good going on. Seeing that his father wanted to make a long speech, he hurriedly cut off his words and asked, "Father, just say what you have to say. I know that elder brother is not good at reading, so you don't need to repeat it." Fan Siwen's face darkened. He said so, but it didn't mean that the eldest son couldn't read. After all, few people could be as smart as Zijian. It seems that the relationship between Zijian and his elder brother is indeed not harmonious. Fan Siwen glanced at him helplessly, and said, "You are now a scholar and have a good teacher. It should not be difficult to raise a scholar in the exam, so my father wants to take my hand. What do you think of Anian's place being given to your elder brother? The reborn wife is farming." Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1390. Fan Zijian was taken aback for a moment, and then a torrent of anger surged in his chest, but he no longer yelled like he did when he was a child, but asked indifferently, "What if my son just can't pass the Juran exam? Who knows if the youngsters in the world can pass the exam? There are so many, but how many of them can't take an inch?" For scholars, being a scholar is just a small step towards the officialdom. It is just a matter of fame and fame. The real hurdle lies in Kaiwei. It is naturally better to pass the Jinshi examination. Because non-Jinshi are not allowed to enter the Hanlin, and non-Hanlin are not granted prime ministers, this has been a tradition since the founding of the Great Zhou dynasty. No matter how proud Fan Zijian is, he is only a scholar, and his future is not guaranteed, unless he can be admitted to Juran. But how difficult it is. Every year, Jiangnan's Qiwei only selects the top 300 people, and when the enrollment is expanded, there are more than 100,000 references, and new talents are added every other year, but Qiwei is only held every 3 years. You can see how many talents have accumulated. If Fan Zijian doesn't pass the Juran examination, then Fan Zijian's favor is another way out for him. If he thinks more about his son, he won't propose to give Fan Xixiao the place of grace at this time, but wait until he after passing the exam. Fan Zijian's chest was filled with anger. He looked at his father with piercing eyes, and asked forcefully, "What if my son fails the exam?" Fan Siwen turned his head with a guilty conscience, and said, "Zijian, don't underestimate yourself. Your gentleman and I have read your article, and we all think it's good. We just need to practice for a while." "But neither you nor the gentleman are examiners," Fan Zijian interrupted him lightly. "Aren't there few people in this world who are talented and famous but fail to pass the exam many times?" Fan Siwen's face was a little gloomy. His experience and qualifications are there, how can he not know this situation? But at the age of 30, Zijian is considered young to be a Jinshi at the age of 30. Even if Fan Siwen thinks his son is very smart, he is not sure that he will be able to pass the examination before he is 30. But Xiao's age is such that the child is dull. Since Zijian has the ability to find his own way out, then what's wrong with him giving his kindness to the bastard early? Thinking of the loneliness of the eldest son in the past few days, Fan Siwen became more determined, and said directly, I have made up my mind on this matter, Zijin. You passed the Tongsheng examination at the age of 9, and the scholar examination at the age of 12, even if you are a father, you are ashamed. If you work harder, you will be able to. Fan Zijin sneered, turned and left. Fan Siwen was taken aback, then patted the table angrily and said, Nizai, who taught you to be so disobedient to your father? Your books have been read into the dog's stomach. It can be regarded as unfilial to come out without telling. Fan Siwen was not happy with Fan Zijin's extreme and unruly behavior. Fan Zijin stopped at the door and sneered, it's the father's fault if the son doesn't teach. The father never taught the son how to behave. Of course the son can't act. You. Fan Zijin flung off his sleeves and left. He woke up a little when he was blown by the cold wind outside. Thinking that the kindness that belonged to him was just given to his brother-in-law by his father, he felt as uncomfortable as a stone was blocked in his heart. Fan Zijin stood in the yard and thought for a while, before deciding to go find his mother. Xia Tong was beaming and preparing for the banquet. When he saw his son coming, he happily took his hand and said, "Isn't your father going to talk to you? That's the end of it?" Fan Zijin glanced at the girls and women, and said, "Mother, let them go down, my son has something to tell you." Only then did Xia Tong notice that his son's expression was not right, and hurriedly asked people to retreat. "What's the matter?" "Father wants to give Fan Zixiao the quota of an iron." As soon as Fan Zijin said that, Xia Tong's face immediately turned pale, and she took 2 steps back and fell down on the chair. She sneered for a while, and said with tears, "Yes, yes, so this banquet is to make up for our wives." Fan Zijin's face became even more serious, and he said, "I have argued with him, but he has already made up his mind to give Fan Zixiao his favor." "Why?" Xia Tong screamed, "you are his legitimate son. You should inherit the foundation of the ancestors and the favor." Xia Tong got up with a and said with a cold face, "I'll go find him." "Mother," Fan Zijin stopped her, and said with a cold face, "If you are really determined to fight for your son to the end, then you go. If you just quarrel with him like before, but you obey him in the end, then don't go, but it's nothing but anger." Xia Tong was taken aback for a moment, then raised his head and looked at his son dumbfounded. Fan Zijin continued to say with a cold face, "If he wants Fan Zixiao to inherit his things, then you will make peace with him, and your son will take you away. Let him straighten the Lu family, and make Fan Zixiao his heir." He sneered and said, "We'll see if he will embarrass Fan Zixiao for the other younger brothers." Xia Tong turned pale with fright, grabbed his son's hand and asked, "What nonsense are you talking about?" "It's not nonsense." Fan Zijin looked at his mother seriously and said, "My son has wanted to say these words for a long time. Ever since I was sensible, I have watched you quarrel, for me, for my concubine, Mom, all these years he fought for Lu. How much have you made things difficult for me and Fan Zixiao? My son has grown up now, and he has achieved fame. Since he won't even keep me in favor, what are we doing here? You can make peace with him, and your son will definitely be better than you in the future. He's still promising and will make you prosperous, even if you remarry again." Fan Zijin really loves his mother. To him, his father has always been an enemy. He wants to fight for his love, but he can't. Every time something happens in the family, he always stands by Fan Zixiao's side. Give him a blow, he has seen other classmates get along with his father, and he doesn't know how envious he is. And the most important person in his life is undoubtedly his mother, because his mother has always been raising him. Seeing his mother often shed tears for Fan Siwen, the idea of reconciliation has long appeared, and now is an opportunity. With a cold light in Fan Zijin's eyes, he suggested to his mother, "Be firm and never give in this time. If he doesn't keep an Ayan's quota, then you will divorce and let him know that our mother and son are not arbitrary. Whom he slaughters." Xia Tong was in a state of confusion, shaking his head and said, "No, we can't make up." Fan Zijin looked at his mother sadly, stepped forward and grabbed her shoulder and said seriously, "Mother, father's heart has already gone to the sky. What else can we gain by staying here except suffering? You have the right to think it is for your son, can you fight with him wholeheartedly?" Most of the time, Xia Tong could obviously win, but she always retreated at critical moments. In the final analysis, she was still reluctant to let Fan Siwen, him leave her, and make things difficult for him, so the mother and son retreated again and again. Fan Zijin could see clearly that if he retreated, he would have nothing, and he would bear the title of Fan Siwen's son in vain. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1391. Xia Tong's heart was completely confused. Fan Zijin also calmed down and waited for her choice, whether to choose him as her son or Fan Siwen. The three masters of the family were all out of their minds. The celebration banquet was about to pass, and the guests all sensed that the atmosphere in Fan's residence was not right. After eating, they talked and laughed for a while before leaving, and began to call people's attention to the movement of Fan's residence. Fan Zijin waited for 3 days but did not get Xia Tong's reply, and the house was quiet, and she did not conflict with Fan Siwen, so he couldn't help but go to her. "Mother, haven't you found your father yet?" Xia Tong burst into tears, and said, "I found it. Your father said that you are quick-witted and well-versed in the world, it shouldn't be difficult for you to pass the exam with your own ability, but your elder brother is dull, I'm afraid." So mother agreed to give him the quota of grace to elder brother, Fan Zijin asked expressionlessly. Xia Tong turned her head away, with a sore nose, she shook her head and said, "I didn't agree, but when did your father hear about me?" "He said he's already doing a job." Fan Zijin felt cold in his heart, and finally asked, "Then do you want to go with your son? Make peace with him." "Silly boy, if we reconcile, how will you go out to meet people in the future?" "Why can't I go out to meet people?" "It's not my fault," Fan Zijin interrupted her loudly, and said with a distorted face, "I am upright, and I go out to meet people openly. I just ask you, you want to come with me, do you? Get out of this place where you cry and suffer." Xia Tong opened his mouth, and could only stare at his son eagerly. Fan Zijin felt cold in his heart, his eyes turned red, and he smiled and said, "My son understands, you chose him again between me and my father, right?" Xia Tong didn't speak. Fan Zijin turned around and left. He ran back to his room and rummaged through the boxes and pulled out the silver box. He was about to open it when a voice behind him asked in surprise, "Zijin, what are you doing?" Fan Zijin was so frightened that he sat down on the ground, turned his head and saw Chi Heiran, and immediately glared, "Why are you here?" Turning around and seeing that the door was still closed, he immediately widened his eyes and asked, "How did you get in?" "You came in, I've been waiting for you in the room, but you didn't even look at me when you came back, and just ransacked the box." It took him a while to react. Fan Zijin was in a bad mood and asked, "You haven't shown up for 2 days, where did you go?" Chi Heiran immediately pouted and said, "I was locked up by my father. They want to give eldest brother a daughter of the Wu family, and they want me to pay homage on behalf of eldest brother. Isn't this pushing elder brother into the fire pit? Of course I don't want to, so I told him they quarreled for a while, and my father and Mrs. Wu locked me up." Fan Zijin stared wide-eyed and asked, "Then how did you get out now?" Chi Heiran curled his lips, "Can they lock me up, young master, with the Chi Mansion's small staff? I came here to ask you for advice, and I have to go back and continue to be locked up in a while." Fan Zijin pondered for a moment, and asked, "You came to my room and no one noticed?" Chi Heiran was complacent, "Of course not. I sneaked in." If someone saw me, I would have gone to you long ago. Why wait for you in your room? Fan Zijan felt relieved, solemnly stuffed the box containing the silver into his arms, and said solemnly, there is no solution to this matter. Marriage has always been the order of the parents and the words of the matchmaker. It is also very easy to marry him, and the only way is to run away. Chi Heiran's eyes widened. Fan Zijan sneered and said, Uncle asked you to pay homage on behalf of eldest cousin, just to blackmail eldest cousin with you. If he doesn't recognize Xiao Wu, then she will be your wife. Chi Heiran shuddered, and shouted, I'm only 12, and the little Wu family is already 16. Do you think uncle will consider this for you? Fan Zijan threatened him, when the time comes, she won't be able to be the wife of the eldest cousin, so she will definitely be your wife. Anyway, you two brothers must have a woman who marries the Wu family, so that they only then can I control you better. Then it's okay if we run away. Of course, you have escaped. If he wants his eldest cousin to marry again, he will have to ask Qi Shaosheng or Qi Xiaotai to worship on his behalf. Anyway, they are not the younger brothers of the eldest cousin. If the time comes, they will just refuse to recognize them. Then find a way to marry them, just send them together. Fan Zijan snorted and sneered, and let them know that we are not easy to mess with. Chi Heiran always felt that Fan Zijan was very hostile today, so he couldn't help asking, are you okay? It's okay. Fan Zijan pointed to the box and said, this is the capital we escaped from. You have to take it well. After I make arrangements, I will find you tomorrow. You should go back quickly. Don't let the people in the Qi mansion find out that you can get out. Chi Heiran held the box in his arms in a daze, and asked, you also run away with me? Fan Zijan rolled his eyes at him, if I don't go with you, do you know where to run away? By the way, take all your money with you, and be careful when you go out. Anyway, it's cheaper for the enemy to stay. Chi Heiran nodded solemnly, hugged the box tightly in his arms and said, don't worry, I will definitely take everything with me. However, even if he didn't lose any money, he didn't have much. He has always spent money lavishly, and has no source of income. He only has 5 taels of monthly money in the Qi mansion, which is not enough for him to eat out. Although Xia Tong subsidizes him a little every month, because he knows that he spends money recklessly, so the subsidy is very little, so he is a paycheck to paying family and can hardly save any money. Sometimes he ran out of money before the monthly bill came down. At this time, Fan Zijan paid him. This time he was lucky, the Qi mansion just issued the next month's order some time ago, so there was only the 5 taels of silver in the box. Chi Heiran looked at his small silver ingots, and then at the banknotes and silver ingots in Fan Zijan's money box, feeling ashamed rarely. You can't eat Zijan all the way, can you? Chi Heiran murmured, Zijan is right, it's cheaper to keep the money. Enemy, my eldest brother and I are the sons of the eldest son, and more than half of the family property in Kifu is it belongs to our brothers. Chi Heiran thought about it, and at night when the night was dark and the wind was high, he would sneak into Wu's house. Recently, he paid close attention to his elder brother's marriage, so he came to listen to the wall a few times in the middle of the night. Occasionally, he saw Wu's hiding money the place. Chi Heiran's martial arts are superb, and his lightness kung fu is even better. At this time, Mrs. Wu is serving Qi Feng to drink, and there are only 2 little girls with hair in her room. Chi Heiran lightly jumped into the room, grabbed the lock of the closet and pulled it hard. The whole lock was deformed. There was a box hidden at the bottom of the closet. Chi Heiran opened it, and saw a stack of banknotes inside. He took them all without thinking. Chi Heiran dropped the box and just covered the closet when he saw the broken lock put aside. He rolled his eyes, quietly slipped back to the room, took the lock of the closet in his own room, and slipped to Wu's room, locked the wardrobe. This kind of lock looks the same at first glance, but it is also the same when you look closely. Except for the different keys, Layman can't tell the difference at all. Anyway, Chi Heiran can't tell the difference after looking at it for a long time. Once the lock is locked, the difference is even more indistinguishable from the outside. Chi Heiran happily ran back to count the banknotes. The more he counted, the more ugly his face became, and finally he slapped the table fiercely, and said in a hateful voice, "My eldest brother and I live in poverty, haha, a concubine of the Wu family has so many banknotes, is simply unreasonable." The guards outside only thought that Chi Heiran was angry again, and didn't even twitch his brows. As long as the fourth young master didn't smash the door or commit suicide, they could just let him make trouble in that room. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1392. Fan Zijian didn't let Chi Heiran use martial arts to escape from the Qi mansion, but spent a lot of trouble to bribe the servants of the Qi mansion to let him slip out with a blind eye. Chi Heiran was very dissatisfied with this, and asked, "I can come out quietly, why did I leave such a big tail?" Fan Zijian only held a fan in his hand. At this time, he tapped the palm of his hand with the handle of the fan, and said proudly, "We are just two teenagers. How can we run away from home without showing any traces? What if he arrives at that time? What if the Yamen reported your death to you? And it's better to keep some of your skills hidden, now is not the time to use them." He sneered and said, "In order not to be noticed by interested people, your martial arts is your whole card, so don't show it easily." Quite a few people in the capital know that Chi Heiran is practicing martial arts, but in a general sense, martial arts practice is kung fu with fists and feet. If you have the ambition to join the army, you should learn horse kung fu. Very few officials' children can learn the sophistication of martial arts. Martial arts. Because it requires not only talent, but also great perseverance and a lot of time and effort, and that kind of martial arts is usually a one-on-one peak duel, which is not applicable on the battlefield. So very few people will learn it, let alone meditate for 10 years to practice internal strength. If you have that kung fu, you might as well practice more writing skills, or read more military books. That is to say, Chi Heiran is stubborn, and since he set his goal at the age of 3, he has been meditating and practicing martial arts every day. Everyone only thought that Chi Heiran had practiced boxing and saber techniques suitable for the battlefield like Chi Ziyuan, but they didn't know that his best skills were internal and light skills. Fan Zijian glanced at him up and down, frowned and asked, "Where's our money? You won't forget it, right? If you really want to forget it, you have to go back and get it for me quietly." Chi Heiran chuckled, patted his chest and said, "How could I have forgotten? It's all wrapped in oiled paper and put here." Fan Zijian heaved a sigh of relief, then frowned and said, "Are there still a few big silver ingots? We can't leave them behind. It's a long way from the capital to Xingzhou Mansion, so we need to prepare more." Chi Heiran waved his hands carelessly and said, "Don't worry, the money is enough." Fan Zijian looked at him suspiciously. He knew his silver, which was only a little over 150 taels. Chi Heiran definitely had no money on him, so it would be good if he could add 5 taels to it. More than 150 taels sounds like a lot, but it is too far from the capital city to the north, and the roads are too chaotic. The travel expenses for 2 people may not be enough, so they still have to save some. Chi Heiran pulled him into the alley, first took out 3 large silver ingots from his sleeve, and Fan Zijian recognized that they were given to him yesterday. Then he took out a thick oil paper bag from his bosom, opened it, and saw that there was a thick stack of banknotes, on which were Fan Zijian's small banknotes, ranging from 10 taels to 20 taels. The bigger the order, most of them were 100 taels, 50 taels, and the last one was 1,000 taels. Fan Zijian's eyes widened, he swallowed, and asked, "Where did this money come from?" "Brother and I," Chi Heiran said triumphantly. "Nonsense," Fan Zijian didn't believe it at all. "If you have this money in your hands, you can still keep it until now. Be honest, where did you get it from? It belongs to me and elder brother, Chi Heiran snorted, more than half of the Chi manor belongs to me and elder brother, what's wrong with me taking some money in advance? Are you copying the Duke of Chi mansion? Fan Zijian stared. Our family doesn't have so much silver. It was taken from Wu's house. I counted it last night. It's more than 50,000 taels. It's probably all the cash in our Chi mansion. Fan Zijian immediately rolled up the banknote and stuffed it into his arms, and said solemnly, we have to hurry up, buy a horse and run for our lives. He didn't expect that Chi Heiran would go to get the money, and even took so much, the Chi government would definitely not let it go. If only Chi Heiran was lost, based on his understanding of that uncle, he would probably deal with it coldly, thinking that Chi Heiran would come back naturally after suffering outside, and would not bother looking for it. But if it was all the cash in the family that was lost, then his uncle would definitely jump. At that time, it would not only be as simple as chasing Heiran back, but also shed a layer of skin if he was not dead. Fan Zijian stared at him bitterly and said, you can just take a few, why are you taking them all? Chi Heiran pouted, and said, the Chi family has a great career, so my elder brother and I only took this little bit and more. Are you really planning to just take the money and leave the family business? Chi Heiran snorted, I really want it, is he willing to score? My eldest brother and I are the sons of the first son, but apart from the 5 taels of monthly silver, what else can we get from the Chi mansion? Chi Shaosheng and Chi Saitai are still sons, you can withdraw as much as you want from the cashier. Fan Zijian coughed lightly and said, you don't spend less than them every month. Don't those merchants come to ask uncle for the money? Speaking of which, Chi Heiran spends a lot of talent, sometimes he hates being extravagant, and just like this, thousands of taels of silver go out, which is almost a year's expenses of the Chi family, and Chi Feng is so angry that he almost vomits blood every time. However, as an old man, he had to admit that he would run away when he beat Chi Heiran, and scolded him into his left ear and out of his right ear. Although Chi Heiran only has 5 taels per month, he can always find a shop that is willing to give him credit, first get the things, and then let people come to Chi Feng to get the money. Fan Zijian gave Chi Heiran the idea at the time, there was no way, who made his uncle be so stingy, and almost bullied his eldest cousin and Heiran to death. But he didn't expect that Heiran would be so determined to hit his uncle with this, and almost every 2 months would spend a large order to irritate him. Fan Zijian thought of his uncle's pain from those hundreds of taels, touched the silver ticket on his chest and said, I think my uncle will vomit blood from anger this time. Chi Heiran felt guilty for a moment, then raised his head and hummed softly. Fan Zijian's original plan was to hire a horse-drawn carriage for the journey. He asked Yan Mo to inquire about it, and he knew that it would cost about 20 taels, but now that they had enough money, he simply waved his hand and bought a horse with Chi Heiran each for the journey. It cost more than 160 taels at once, and later facts proved how wrong his decision was. 2 teenagers who had never traveled far before left the capital with a stack of banknotes in their pockets and rode 2 horses. They found out that they were in the wilderness when they felt hungry. It means nothing to eat. The 2 teenagers looked at each other while riding on the horse, and in the end Chi Heiran raised his hand and said, well, I'm going to hunt, and we roast it. Have you brought a bow and arrow? Fan Zijian asked. Chi Heiran stared back at him with wide eyes, and said, you didn't say that we want to hunt by ourselves.